Hey honeys, today we are transforming my corner of the living room from a massive mess basically to a colourful fold away sewing space with a beautiful backdrop for filming as well. Even though I love my massive husky table, it's just too big for this apartment. We used to have a much bigger house and I had a whole room for sewing that was like well lit and nice for filming. Now we only have one spare room, so that's kind of used for storage for all of my sewing stuff. So practically to actually be sewing in there is not really possible. There isn't enough space. And then on top of that, just not really having any storage in the living room to put anything in, and I have to go in there for everything, and then I end up sort of just stacking stuff behind the TV and like really just letting it pile up everywhere. The sewing table that I chose has a solution for that as well. And then I also repaint magazine rack that I thrifted. I repaint my chair and reupholster it so it's fun and colourful. And then we make this wall hanging. We also make a gorgeous table cover with a thread catcher for when I'm sewing, and I show you how to miter the corners beautifully on bias tape, join the ends of the bias tape seamlessly, and just do everything really neatly. So I've just measured the top of my table and I think I'm going to make a cute little table cover for it. I've had this Ace denim for so long. You've probably seen a million pairs of leopard print jeans on the internet, which I was obsessed with, but because my body has been changing, I decided not to make jeans because I was worried that they wouldn't fit me again in a month or so. I'm excited to have thought of a way to use this in my everyday life. I've had to piece together little bits because I just really didn't have very much of this. And out of the scraps, I did manage to get a couple more rectangles. One I cut wider, and I'm going to pleat it in at the bottom to give a little bit of 3D effect so that it can be a little thread catcher. And then the other one I cut taller because I want it to hang off the edge of the table like this, Velcro underneath the table cover. I decided to pivot and use scuba fabric under my denim because it's a little squishy, so it'll absorb some of the impact from the sewing machine. And then it's actually kind of non-slip, like it doesn't want to move around on the table when I laid it down, which I really like because I don't want to have to attach it in some way. I ended up using Heat and Bond, which is like a glue webbing. It's paper backed at first, so you iron it onto the wrong side of your fabric, and then once it's completely cool, you can peel the backing off, and then your fabric is essentially like has a glue backing, and you can put that down on the wrong side of your backing fabric and iron it onto there. You do still need to quilt your layers together though, because when the glue will like start to wear, it may start to lift up, but if you quilt it, then it should stay looking beautiful. I just went with like straight lines. I actually think that like a checkerboard pattern could be really nice, but I went with 1 inch straight lines because I'm lazy and I don't want to add any more work on, and it actually came out looking really nice in the end. And then you can just buff away the lines with a damp cloth if you use chalk. I'm just using some store-bought binding to finish the edges. I'm going to sew it onto the wrong side first, and then I will show you how to miter the corners and join the ends seamlessly. Sew down towards the corner, and then before we get there, I'm going to mark out my seam allowance. So you'll use the size of bias tape that you're using. If you're doing 1/2 inch, you'll mark 1/2 inch in from the end. And then sew down to that point and drop the needle into the machine. And then lift the presser foot and pivot so that you can sew directly towards the corner. And then you're going to pull your project out. Then fold the bias tape up along that line we just stitched. Make sure it's all out of the way. And then fold it down to meet the new seam allowance. And we're going to start sewing from here. And obviously keep sewing if you have a lot of bias tape, but I have come back around to the other side. So to connect the ends of the bias tape, you're going to measure the total width, which is 1 3/4 on mine. And then you need to mark out where the two edges overlap. And then from that mark, measure down the width of your bias tape. And you're going to cut that off as straight as you can. Now this overlap is going to allow us to sew it together. So what you're going to do is you're going to line the ends of your bias tape up at a 45-degree angle. And then you're going to stitch diagonally from corner to corner. Then trim off the excess from the seam allowance. And I'm going to finger press mine open. You can press it, or if it's a really thin fabric, you might just try and go to one side and then just sew it down. And you'll see it's seamless when you fold it to the right side. All you can see is just a tiny little diagonal line. And when you've finished sewing your bias tape all the way around, turn it to the front and fold the seam allowance over a little bit away from the corner. I like to do both sides. I usually come from the opposite direction that I'm sewing. I don't know that it matters, but I think if you are sewing off the edge of a fold, it's easier to drop down rather than like go up, if that makes sense. So I'm gonna fold my bias tape as far as I can, and then just fold the other edge over to meet it. And just play around with it, because you want bias tape to be tight. When bias tape is tight, that's when it's not going to wrinkle. So the tighter you can get it, the smoother and flatter it will be. And then just stitch close to the edge. And when you get to the corner, just leave the needle in, lift the presser foot, and pivot your project. And then some people do like to go in and just stitch down this corner here. I don't know if I'll bother with this project. I feel like it looks pretty good without. Okay, just binding the top edge of my thread catcher. Basting the top layer down before using the same techniques for the binding. For the Velcro, I'm adding the scratchy side onto the thread catcher because I want it to face upwards so that I can put the soft side on the table cover, and then when it's down on the table, it won't scratch it if I take the thread catcher off. I tried quilting together like a sandwich with some quilt batting in the middle. And I have quilted like a few things in the past, like bags and smaller things, and they've come out really good, but I don't know if it's a combination of this batting I've never used before, and it's quite poofy, and also the size of the project, because it was like this size square, so I gave up. Work smarter, not harder. I have this scuba, it's like probably a 2mm scuba, and I feel like it's just going to give enough stability to the back of this black fabric, which is like a thin cotton lawn or something like that. And I'm just going to baste it around the edge, and then I'm going to lay it out flat and put my pockets on and stitch them down. And I think once I have the pockets on, that will be enough areas where like the backing fabric is sewn together that it's not going to like go all baggy, because there's going to be pockets covering the whole thing. So I have this Supervan zebra print that I made a dress out of. I believe it's a dead stock that Rainbow Fabrics had a while back, and I tried to interface it, but it just bubbled up. It's really like super lightweight, and it wouldn't be any good for pockets if I left it by itself. So I managed to peel the interfacing off really carefully, and I cut this white twill that I have, and it's really nice heavyweight. And I want the pockets to be 6 inches high. So I cut them to 6 inches high, and then the width of the wall hanging plus 2 inches of width per pocket. So there's going to be 4 pockets. So I'll sew this down onto the backing, but I'll like pleat it on each pocket so that it gives some width at the top. And then the zebra I cut to 1.5 inches wider, because I'm going to sew it right sides facing, and then when I flip it right sides out, I want the zebra to essentially fold around and bind the edge. So there'll be a layer of zebra on the inside at the top and the bottom. Because it's so thin, it's not going to create extra bulk and it will finish the edges. And then these short edges I'll leave raw, and they'll just go inside the binding at the side of the hanging when I bind the whole thing. And then this wooden dowel that I'm going to hang the wall hanging with is just from Ace Hardware, but I'll try and link one for you. I just pressed this one, so this is what the back is going to look like, and then the front will be seamless. And I do really want to keep it that way. The only thing I'm worried about is this like rolling or bunching once it's sewn on. So I was thinking about doing a line of like stitch in the ditch on the back, but I think it might ruin the nice clean look. And I wonder if we're sewing like in between, it can't roll around too much. Okay, I'm gonna measure out the midpoint and quarter point of the backing, and then I'll measure the mid and quarter points of these, and then I'll stitch them down along those lines, and I'll go back in and like create the pleats, and then I'll stitch along the bottom of each. And I think I'm gonna work from the top down because I want to overlap the pockets by probably just a tiny bit, like 1/8 of an inch or something. The black will peek through as the pocket opens, but obviously it will go with the black and white zebra, so it's fine. And on the white bits, I'm using a water erasable marker, and on the black bits, I'm using just a piece of red chalk. I'm just doing this by eye. I added 2 inches to each pocket. So essentially each overlap should be 1/2 inch to take away 1 inch from the total width of the pocket. As you can see, the project gets really bulky and I had to roll it up super tight. My favorite tip for fabrics like lightweight silk bias tape that get pulled down under the machine is to just use a little piece of tissue paper . And it just stabilizes the project when it's under the machine. Obviously use a small stitch length like you usually would. I go for about 1.5, and then the stitches perforate the paper, so you should be able to just pull it off really easily. I'm just going to make some loops for the top of the hanging because I got a dowel to put through it, and this is just 5 inches of the same silk I used as the binding, and I'm going to stabilize it with the tissue paper and then basically just sew with a straight stitch and press the seam open like on the outside, because then I'm going to fold it over the dowel so the raw edges will be on the inside of the loops. Guess what? I'm such a dummy because I just cut it off. I just cut the fabric. Yeah. I don't need to do this. Ugh. I thought that this was going to be gross foam, but actually I just think it's sawdust from the edge of the seat, and the foam looks pretty good. I think I'm going to recover it. I have this special wadding that I have used in bag making, but it's like a really thick quilt batting. It's called Dacron. So what I think I'll do is I'll just go with a layer of that over before I put the fabric on, but just to give it a little bit more cushion. I'm so happy to get rid of this disgusting fabric. I folded the fabric along the stripe to try and align the stripes like straight from front to back. And then starting from the top, bottom and sides, I'm just pulling the fabric taut and adding some staples. And then you can work towards the corners. They will be a little bit tricky, but just fold the fabric and add loads of staples and you should be able to get them nice and tight. And then trim off the excess fabric. You could always cover this with another fabric on the bottom, but I'm the only person that's going to see it, so I decided not to. I scuff sanded the wood. This doesn't need to look pretty or even. It's just to create a rough surface so the paint can stick to it. And then make sure you wipe off the dust with a damp cloth, otherwise you'll bring it into your house. And I did sand on top of some plastic because I just didn't want wood chippings to be going down all over like the neighbors' balconies and things like that. And then I'm using a regular wall paint and I was planning to top coat it, but when I asked in Ace Hardware, the paint guy told me that it should be fine, it shouldn't chip, but if it does start chipping over time, then I should just sand it down and repaint it using a high quality cabinetry paint instead. So I was quite surprised about that, but I guess I trust him and that was nice of him to tell me that instead of trying to get me to buy more stuff. I just put everything together and I can't believe how cute it came out. This fits pretty much everything I need on like a daily basis. I have some buttons, tags, bias tape, all my thread, and then like cutting tools, loop turner, seam ripper, rotary cutter, some patterns. I may not keep these here, but I just throw my pattern pieces on the floor or like some like fabric scraps or like other pattern pieces, and I need somewhere to keep these things so that they're not like just everywhere. So I may just keep the magazine rack for shrapnel that goes with each project and I throw it in there, and then at the end of the project I empty it, hopefully. This table cover fits really nicely in the cupboard and I could probably keep another couple of bits behind it on one of the shelves, but I probably will just save that for when this all goes away so that there's a dedicated place for it. And then the wires from the extension plug, the sewing machine fit on the bottom shelf in the cupboard. The sewing machine fits down inside and so does the iron, which is really nice so that everything can go away and have a place. And then in the top drawer, I will probably pull in a few extra things that I use on a daily or weekly basis, maybe a few basic zippers or some more bits like bias tape and stuff like that. I'll probably switch the table around and have it out in the room so that my backdrop when I'm filming for YouTube will be like this really beautiful zebra print and the blue. But it's amazing that it just wheels around and you can move it wherever you want. The wheels also lock, so it's not going to run away from you while you're sewing or anything. Say goodbye, everyone.